What's up, everybody? Welcome to Fan Sports New York Varsity. I'm your host, Frank Langella, joined by my co-host, Marcelio Langella. And this is our Section 1 Class C and D team preview, as well as our Hudson Valley Football League team preview. And we want to welcome everyone to the show. Mars, how's it going, brother?
It's going well, man. I think the fun thing is that we're back in the football. We're getting ready for our Week 0 games as well as the scrimmages. And I'm just excited that we can finally have these shows again and just dive right into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this show, we're going to dive into the different programs. And at the end, we're going to give some bold prediction. But before we start, I do want to let the audience know, if you guys enjoy this content, please give a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel to help boost our channel up. And if you want to support our channel, you can go to our website at fansportsny.com or to our description below where it has our Patreon, and any donations would be greatly appreciated to help us continue to build. And we've been slowly building, and we can't be more appreciative of the fans and support that we've had through our last couple of years. I think this is a year 3 for us. So I really do appreciate it. If you guys want to give support, make sure to, again, check out the website at fansportsny.com. We're also going to try to put links in our description below this video.
Well, Frank, I gotta say, it's pretty good for just a few guys on Twitter, you know?
Yeah.
A few guys on Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's dive into it. Again, we're going to start at the C and D schools, and then we're going to go to the Hudson Valley League, which is an independent league. And the divisions are separated into 2 different leagues, right? And the D schools are kind of separated into 2 different leagues. And they're going to play each other at the end. That's how kind of D works. But let's start with, again, don't know the names of the league, so I'm just going to call League A and League B. Let's start with League A, and the first school that's coming up is Westlake, and that's coached by Coach Castellano. And this Westlake was in Section 1B last year, and they moved down to C because of enrollment. Last year they were 2-6. They did not make the playoffs last year. But I tell you what, Westlake has been a pretty strong program, Mars, over a period of time, especially in B for a while. Last 5 years, they're 24-17, which is 59% win percentage. And we're going to see they're tied for 4th compared to the other schools in this division, tied for 4th in wins and tied for 3rd in win percentage. So this is a program that knows how to put a productive product out there. And they're going to be returning some guys that were very young last year. They're about 8 or 9 starters returning on the offensive side of the ball. They are returning their quarterback. They're returning, I believe, 4 offensive linemen and a couple tight ends. So a couple of the big bodies up front is coming back. Offensively was a bit of a struggle last year in B. They were number 9 out of 10 in points scored in the B class. I would imagine with more experience and obviously getting a little bit more stronger will help them a lot. And playing against smaller schools, I think, will also help them move the ball better. Defensively, Mars, they're also returning 7 of 11 starters. They were 8 out of 10 in points allowed in B. Now, I didn't get to talk to Coach directly, so these are kind of guesstimates about the starters returning. I also want to make something clear, too, when we talk about players. This is not just players that I think are starting or anything like that. This is just my research or conversations I had with coaches. So, Mars, let's talk about some of those players. First guy I want to talk about is about their quarterback, Michael Pagan. He's the junior, 6'1", 170 pounds. And this is a guy that I hear a lot of rave about it, and I think this guy's an impressive young man. This is a guy I saw during the summer, someone who's definitely refining his technique. And you can see he was very raw when I watched him on tape, but you can see he's kind of growing, and I'm expecting a big kind of jump up from his sophomore to junior year this upcoming season. Another guy, Christian Knapp, at outside linebacker. He kind of is a running back, fullback hybrid as well. He's a returning starter on both sides of the ball. Another guy, running back, Stephen DiNapoli, a junior, 5'10" kid, explosive guy, straight line speed. When he gets in space, it's hard to catch him. Runs a little bit high. He could definitely work on getting a little lower, but someone who could be explosive in space. And you can see they bring back a lot of backs. Another guy, fullback and strong safety, Jake Zino, 6 foot, 155 pounds, sophomore. Expecting big things from that young man. Christian Osipinti. And again, I apologize. I butcher names all the time, so don't take it personally. Returning player, senior, running back and cornerback. They also got a couple of transfers. Chris Cali, is someone from RCK who went back to Westlake, the junior, had over 1,000-yard rushing and 10 touchdowns at Kennedy, and he's going to bring another boost.
You mean you said RCK? You mean KC?
KCHS. Kennedy Catholic.
I was gonna say, I didn't know he was from RCK.
Kennedy Catholic. Excuse me. Good job pointing that out. Kennedy Catholic. He was at all the different letterings. But outside of him, he's bringing another boost to already crowded, looks like running back room. Just bring another guy who can to make explosive plays, and he's someone to keep an eye on for me. He was kind of my player to watch for this group. Another guy, Nick Castellano, linebacker and wide receiver. This is an athletic linebacker. I thought he moved pretty well on tape. And he's not afraid to attack the line of scrimmage. I think he can also go into coverage. And finally, Daniel Costa, an offensive lineman, right? I mentioned a bunch of backs, but they need guys up front. They're returning 4 out of the 5 starting offensive linemen. If they can shore up that offensive line, I think Westlake has a really good chance to cause a lot of havoc in C-Mars. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Westlake, last year was a tough year for sure, and I think a lot of it has to do with the young team that they had. I mean, based off of looking into the roster, they had a lot of kids who had transferred out, so they kind of were filling in with a lot of young players. Well, as you mentioned, they did gain some of those players back in some ways, and one of the big players that, like you mentioned already, that I'm also looking into as well was Chris Cali. I mean, he did very well in the Catholic League, and I think he's going to be a big contribution to this team, as well as a lot of others. I mean, Westlake has a lot of athletic kids, and I think that they were young, so they kind of were suffering from that, that young wave of kids.
Yeah, very raw.
They're very young and they were very raw. So that they, at the end of the day, usually what happens is those young kids get a lot of experience and they just get better because they play a lot more time. So I think Westlake will have a lot of kids returning, and that means they'll just have more experience when they play this upcoming season.
Yeah, and some of those I mentioned are juniors, so they're going to be on varsity another year. So they have a nice mix of seniors and juniors on this group. But let's go to another team that was in B that dropped down, Putnam Valley. And that's, again, coached by Coach Ryan Elliser. And I apologize again. It's been one of those long days. But last year, Mars, they were 0-8, and they were in B. They've suffered a ton of injuries last year. And it was kind of some devastating injuries, but they moved down to C this year. And, it's been a bit of a struggle the last 5 years. They're 9-31 record-wise, but they are returning a lot of players. And offensively, 8 of 11 starters are coming back. They do have to replace their quarterback, but all five offensive linemen are back, which is always a boost to get those veteran presence back on the offensive line. And when I spoke to Coach, a big thing he emphasizes ball security. I mean, they need to protect the football, make sure they're not giving other offenses more opportunities than they should, and they need to be more explosive. And those are 2 points of emphasis that Coach brought to me offensively. Defensively, Mars, also 8 of 11 starters coming back. You do lose Esposito, which is a tough player to replace. Excuse me. And Coach talked about on the defensive side of the ball, they need to be more aggressive. I mean, they want to dictate to the offense, right, and give themselves more opportunities on the offensive end, and that's by being more aggressive, attacking the football. Now, the biggest question mark, Coach mentioned it, and it's similar to years past, is health. I mean, they suffered some brutal injuries last year. There's already, talk about they've had some injuries during camp. And so depth is a big question for Putnam Valley, because if they can stay relatively healthy, I do think they have the guns to cause some havoc in this smaller league on C as well. So it's going to be big if they can stay healthy. Now, the goals, I talked about it with Coach, it's a week-by-week basis. They're not looking too far ahead. They just want to win the first game that comes right in front of them. So, again, staying focused. But looking at a couple players, Mars, the first guy I want to talk about is their quarterback, Thomas Cunningham. I mentioned they have to replace a quarterback. He is a junior, and Coach, mentioned a pretty interesting story with this young man. As a sophomore, he had to work with both the JV and the varsity, so he was doing dual work for his team. And now, again, full year into the system, they are excited about this young man, so that's somebody to keep an eye on. Another guy, running back, Richard Messiter, junior, outstanding, was on the JV. He's also a quick defender. Another guy to keep an eye on, and this is my player to watch for this group, Alice Gassage. defensive end and offensive lineman. He's a junior, Mars. He's 6'2", explosive edge defender. He uses his hands pretty well. And this was a guy that I liked what I saw on tape for a young player. I know he's a bit raw, but he's going to have to anchor on both sides of the ball, on the defensive side and offensive side, and I think he has the capabilities of doing it. He's not the thickest guy, but he's got some toughness to him, and I like what I saw. Another guy, offensive lineman and linebacker, Hudson Speraza, number 59, really productive, athletic center. And again, he's going to have to be another strong point at the linebacker spot, again, especially going against some of these run-heavy teams. You really need strong linebacker play, and you need defensive linemen who can be disruptive. So he's going to be very important. Another guy to keep an eye on was very interesting, defensive back and wide receiver Marcus Oliveira, the junior. Coach talked about him. He's a strong leader. He's going to have to be a strong contributor on both sides of the ball, so the workload is definitely going to pick up. And I do think this is another guy who has good size to him. Finally, to wrap it all off, Caden Glenn, wide receiver and linebacker, sophomore, another really strong JV player. Coach talked about him. And again, JV doesn't always translate to varsity, but they are really excited about this young man. They said it was hard to keep him down on the JV, but multi-sport kid, wrestler, wax. Mars, what are your thoughts on Putnam Valley?
Yeah, Putnam Valley is a very young team. I mean, when you look around, they're going to have a lot of returning guys coming back. Their entire offensive line is going to be returning. But the big question or concern is the health, right? I think that when you're a smaller team or a smaller school, any injury could be devastating.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's kind of the issue that Putnam Valley has right now, is that they are struggling with injuries in depth, as you mentioned already. I think they have some young guys who are really talented, but the question is going to be, do they stay healthy enough to withstand the entire season, right? And I think that's going to be something that's really important to look at going forward for Putnam Valley.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to the next group, Mars. Staying in the same division, let's talk about Valhalla, coached by Art Troilo. Last year they were 6-4. They lost to Dobbs Ferry in the Class C section title game. The last 5 years, Mars, Valhalla's been very strong. 26-18, 59% win percentage. They are third in wins and tied for third in win percentage over the same time period with the rest of the schools in C and D. Offensively, I didn't get to talk to Coach, unfortunately, so I don't have the exact number of offensive starters coming back, but I do know they have to replace their longtime quarterback in Dawson, who was an absolute stud for them for multiple years. Offensive line, I think they're bringing back 2 or 3 linemen, but losing Dawson is a big blow. And offensively, they were number 3 out of 10 schools in C&D in points scored in the regular season last year at 27.6. And, there's been talk that you might see the offense change a little bit because of that change in quarterback, to going back to more some of that, option style that Coach used to run at Harrison, which is going to be, kind of those double wings or double slots type of thing. I don't think they completely go away from it. Maybe they do, but expect to see more of that offense generated in his game plan. Defensively, I do think they have about 5 starters coming back, I believe. They do lose Jack Sullivan, which is huge. He was a huge part of that defense at the linebacker spot. And the defense was 4th out of 10 in points allowed in the regular season. I thought they had some difficulty stopping power running teams. So that's going to be interesting to see how they kind of adjust to that this year, especially going against some of these other power running teams that are going to try to run it right at them. Biggest question mark, obviously, quarterback is a huge one, and offensive line. Can they handle some of the size of the other schools? But I do think Valhalla's got some skill guys, some talented skill guys. And one guy to keep in mind, wide receiver, defensive back, Basiaka Butcher. 6'2", explosive. He can play out in space. He can play out wide. He can also be in the slot. He can run some jet sweeps with him. And I do think they're going to move him around. He's going to play wide receiver, also be their wing back. If they're trying to do some of those counter plays and stuff like that, just get him the ball in some space, whether it's open space or some counter action. I think he can be a big-time player for them. He's a senior. Another one, wide receiver Dev Cooper, was a kind of the slippery wide receiver. He makes people miss in open field. And, he's a good complement to Basiaka. But they're not alone. They have another guy, wide receiver and cornerback, Jacarius Potet. So, you can see they have a couple guys, and Potet's kind of another similar explosive type player, reliable target. So they have some weapons. I'm interested to see what they're going to do, but we got to talk a little bit about the big guys, right? I mean, offensive tackle and defensive end, Andrew Barabasi, 6'1", 255 pounds. They need those anchors on both sides of the line of scrimmage. He's someone to keep an eye on, the junior. Another guy, offensive guard and linebacker, Michael Girdauskis. And again, I'm surprised I was able to even get that name out of my mouth. But the senior, going to have to be an impact two-way player. And at the linebacker spot, I thought he flowed pretty well from what I saw on tape. Another guy, linebacker and running back, Cheek Diallo, the senior. This guy's a bulky kid, 5'10", about 5'9", 219 pounds, right? Bulky kid. And again, going up against teams that run at you, if you got some linebackers that got some bulk to them, that's always helpful if he can flow in the right direction. Another guy, defensive tackle, offensive line, Ryan Chillo, the junior. He's a guy who got some playing time last year that I saw as well. And to wrap it all off, I think another defensive back and running back, Rob Foysette, the junior. So you can see they have a mix of juniors and seniors here, but I think Valhalla, Mars, I think they have some talent. It's up to the fronts to see how they're going to end the quarterback spot. But Mars, what are your thoughts on Valhalla?
Yeah, I think Valhalla has a lot of talent, and I think their backs are definitely going to be really explosive players in many different ways. But I think the big question, and I do agree with you, is the offensive line. Whether or not the offensive line is going to create a lot of lanes for these backs to make big plays, or it's going to be more difficult for them to do so. Because at the end of the day, I think Valhalla, generally for the most part, and you saw by the stats, your 59% win percentage in the last 5 years, right? They win, right? They have an effective system. They have good coaching. It's just going to be, the little pieces that have to go together. And honestly, that's the whole point of coaching, right? Can you find the guys to replace those that had left? And I think if the offensive line can establish itself, then I think they're going to be all right.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what happens at the quarterback spot. Let's go to the next team, Albertus Magnus. And this is coached by Coach Matt Giannattino. In his first season, I spoke with Coach. Really great energy with my conversations with him. Very enjoyable conversation talking football with him. But last year, they went 5-4. They lost to Dobbs Ferry in the playoffs. Last 5 seasons, they're 21-21, so they're 500. But they're also returning some talent. And offensively, 6 of 11 starters coming back. At the quarterback spot, they are moving their quarterback from last year. So I'm going to say they have to replace their quarterback. Offensive line-wise, 2 out of 5 coming back. They lose Gamey Savor, who was a big-time running back for them, which is not easy to replace. And last season, they were 4th out of 10 in points scored in the regular season. When I spoke to Coach about the offense, kind of what the identity they want, he emphasized fundamentals. Fundamentals was very important to him. It's huge for the kids, and he's emphasizing that. And they're going to be running an air raid. I mean, they want to out-formation defenses, right? They want to win the numbers game. And what that means is kind of like leverage defenses to their favor. Now, Coach talked about, hey, listen, we do want to run the ball. I mean, running the ball is important to have that identity running, but they love to pass. And so expect to see some heavy passing games from Albertus Magnus. Defensively, Mars, 5 of 11 starters are returning. You lose a guy like Edelman, Bricker, Joseph. So they did lose some talented defenders that were important players. And I think this is the unit that probably could, change things. They were number 7 out of 10 in points allowed at 24.6 points a game. I spoke to Coach about the identity defense. It's all about flying to the ball for him. Pursuit, flying to the ball. He believes the secondary will be pretty strong. And when I talk to some of these players coming up, you'll see why. When I asked Coach about the biggest question mark, offensive line depth was the biggest one to him. And, whenever you see your first-year coaches, you always want to ask kind of what the goals are, program goals. And he wants to change the narrative of the program. And that was a big thing that he emphasized in my conversation. He also wants to prepare the kids for college and hold them to a high standard, both in the classroom and out on the football field. And I think that was an interesting note from Coach. Now, players to watch, Mars, I do have a few of them. Albertus Magnus has some interesting players. How about their quarterback? Listen to this, Gabriel Miles. He is a freshman, Mars, 6 foot, 200 pounds. A 6 foot, 200 pound freshman quarterback. You don't usually find those that often, but he's a dual threat kid. Obviously, he's going to be super, super raw, but they think his athleticism is well above his age. Another guy to keep an eye on, one of my favorite players in the class, wide receiver and defensive back, Mike LaRusso. 5'8", 160 pounds. He is fast, he is shifty, and in my opinion, the best route runner in this class. I mean, he creates separation with his route running. He is pretty pretty precise. I saw him during the summer, and again, it just showed me in person what I'm seeing in tape. A guy who can beat you going deep. Not a very big guy, but he can win by being shifty. And he's also tough. He's not afraid of going over the middle either. But he's a senior, and he's somebody definitely to watch. A couple other guys, too, in this secondary. Coach talked about it. Cornerback, King St. LaFleur, sophomore, long, athletic. I thought he had pretty good instincts for a guy his age. He can have a big year. How about safety and wide receiver Solomon Flowers? 5'11" kid, really fast. He was a transfer. That came in. You also have cornerback and wide receiver Jaquan Johnson, the sophomore, 5'9". He was a transfer from Bergen Catholic. I mean, you're seeing some of these guys right here. I just named 3 DBs, and a couple of them probably going to be playing both ways. A infusion of athleticism brought to the team. But a couple other guys, how about up front, right? Defensive end and center Joel Herrera, the junior, 6 foot, 210 pounds. I thought he showed some good signs on tape as well. And you want to see that jump from his sophomore to junior year. Defensive tackle and offensive tackle Imai Belu, 6'2", 290 pounds, junior. Big-bodied kid. He's hard to move, right? And I obviously want to continue to work on using his hands and his footwork, but big-bodied kid. And another guy I really like, linebacker and tight end, my player to watch, Chris Metcalf. Senior, 6'1", 190 pounds. He's really going to have to anchor on that defense. But he's a guy who can be your lead tackler. He's a pretty strong tackler and can make plays for you. In that tight end spot, he's probably going to have to make some plays as well. And then last year's quarterback, who's moving to running back, John Argenio. He's a junior. He was a quarterback last year. And coach said this, and this is always a great compliment whenever I hear coaches say this. He is one of the best leaders on the team. So, Mars, what are your thoughts on Albertus Magnus?
Albertus Magnus is a very interesting team because they have a lot of talent that is returning to this squad, and I really think that they can really cause some havoc. Right? I really like the way that Michael LaRusso plays. He's just a straight up dog. He's shifty, he's fast, he can make a lot of plays. He's just a straight up playmaker. Yeah. And also Gabriel Miles is going to be a guy that's going to be interesting to see. I mean, for coach to come out and say all the things he's saying, like he's just has all this talent. He's way more talented than his age is going to have him at. And I think that's going to be something interesting to look forward to this season. I want to see how he plays because the big question I have is about offensive line. I mean, I feel like I say this quite often, but the offensive line is going to be what establishes the run and also just protection for young players, like Gabriel Miles. So the question I have is just how much depth do you have at the offensive line and even other positions that what if they key off on my like who's going to then become the guy that takes the load and makes big plays when you need that to happen? So that's going to be a question I have for this season. Obviously, Albertus Magnus has a lot of talent. The question is, do they have depth as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, air raid with a freshman quarterback, it definitely draws questions, right? Let's go to the final team in this league, in the C group, and then we'll go to the D school for this league. I didn't mention this, but I think this league is kind of, it's a strong one. This is a strong, well put together. But the next school is Croton Harmon. And Croton Harmon is coached by Coach Ryan Callahan. And last year they were 2-7. They lost to Valhalla in the playoffs. It was the first time they've been in the playoffs in a long time. So I do think it was in common. I know the record doesn't scream, like a huge success, but I thought it was a big deal and a step forward for the program. Now, again, it's been a bit of a struggle the last 5 years. They're 9-30. They haven't had more than 2 wins since 2018 and 4 wins since 2012, right? But they're returning some guys. Offensively, 7 of 11 starters are coming back. They're bringing back their quarterback. 3 out of 5 offensive linemen are returning. Offense was a bit of a struggle last year, and it's good to have those kids come back. They were number 8 out of 10 in points scored. When I spoke to Coach about the offense, he wants to improve the running game. He wants to be more consistent. Staying on blocks was a big one for him that he was emphasizing in my conversation. Defensively, they were 8 out of 10 in points allowed as well, but 8 of 11 starters are coming back. Coach talked about rallying to the ball. They need to create more negative plays. And so, he might be calling more aggressively on the defensive side of the ball to try to generate those things. So that's going to be interesting. When I asked about the biggest question mark, he had an interesting line. He said, will everyone buy into all 3 phases of the game? They've been happy about their progress during the summer, but that was a big question mark for him. And the goal is, they made the playoffs for the first time in a long time. They want to improve the program and get to 500. I do think that's a pretty realistic step for them. Now, players to watch, Mars, I actually think Croton Harmon has some players definitely to keep an eye on, and some guys that were hurt last year that are coming back. But I want to start with my player to watch for the group, and that is their quarterback, Jacob Jones. Solid-sized kid, solid arm. This is a guy who I think could make a pretty big jump. Not many people know about him or talk about him, but I saw some summer stuff from him. I saw some tape work. If they can hold up offensive line-wise and pass protection, I think he can make plays for you. Another guy, running back and defensive back, Ben Reed, the junior. He's going to be leading this secondary, but he's also going to have to carry the load. The coach talked about improving the run game. It's going to fall on him along with some other people, but he's going to have to try to carry that load. He's a junior as well. Carter Schmidt, who's a wide receiver, tight end, and linebacker. He missed last season with an injury. He is back. They're excited about that. Jackson Carney is a guy I talked about a couple seasons ago. Wide receiver, defensive back, kick returner. He missed last season as well. He's back. He can bring another dynamic at the wide receiver spot. And as a defensive back, when I talked about him a couple years, I actually liked what I saw on tape from him as a young player. Another guy, Mekhi Smithwick, the junior. He had a really strong game when he stepped in versus, I believe it was Valhalla. He had over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's a running back and outside linebacker. Wide receiver and defensive back, Xander Matthews. Coaches like the progress from him, the senior, this summer. And now let's talk about the guys up front, right? Offensive lineman and linebacker, Gabe Camieri. He's going to have to anchor at that linebacker spot. Coach talked about that, the senior, but a two-way player is going to have to be, strong for them. Offensive lineman, Aiden Nikic, 6'1", 210 pounds, returning offensive lineman. Jack Urich, 6'2", 220 pounds, returning offensive lineman. That's a junior. And how about this young man? Offensive guard and defensive tackle, Jack Nussbaum, transfer from Stepinac, 5'10", 240 pounds. I liked what I saw defensively from him. This is a guy who was pretty disruptive, had a really good start coming out of his stance. But again, those are some guys. The other guard spot is a battle between Josh Chavis and Parker Stevens. So I'm interested to see how that worked out during camp as well. Mars, what are your thoughts on Croton Harmon?
Croton Harmon, I think, in my opinion, has so many guys returning, and that's usually a pretty good sign for a team because now allows for the experience to take over rather than having to teach everybody a brand new scheme, right? And I think that's going to be something that's important to look at for Croton Harmon. But obviously, the whole and the big question is going to be, how much do these kids? And you mentioned this before, as the coach had said, buy into the program and buy into the scheme because at the end of the day, I think getting kids to buy into your scheme is the most, in my opinion, the biggest priority for any coach to do. Because if kids don't believe in what you're doing, then it's going to be a lot harder for them to stick with you and to stick with what you're trying to get done as a program. So I really think that they have ability to at least, come up with a plan, come up with cohesion, and keep that going. Because I think that you look at offensive line, 3 out of the 5 are returning. Offense in general, 7 out of the 11. Defensively, you're even getting more. I feel like at the end of the day, you're getting a good amount of kids back, right? And I think Croton Harmon, is not. I don't necessarily think they're going to have a monster season, but I think that they have the ability to come away with some wins because they do have a lot of kids returning, and they have, if they're all on the same page, then that's going to just benefit them in the long run because it just shows you that if you come up with a plan that's cohesive and you have all this experience, it's going to lead to wins, right? I think Croton Harmon has the ability to do so. It's just, can they stay on course and can they just buy in? I can see that happening. Yeah, I can. That's the most important thing for any coach.
Yeah, but another issue that's come up, and you've mentioned a few other programs already. Look at the amount of starters coming back. So it's like all these teams have a veteran presence coming back this year. Let's go to the last school in this league, and it's the D school, Haldane, coached by Ryan McConville. I thought last year they had a strong year, Mars. They were 6-4. They lost to Tuckahoe in the D championship, Section D championship. And obviously in Section 1 had the opportunity for that school to go to the state tournament, even if you lose in the section. They lost to Moriah in the state quarters. And Haldane had a strong year last year. And, you got to give the coaching staff and the program a lot of credit. The last 5 years, Mars, 24-18, 57 win percentage, which is tied for fourth in wins and fifth in winning percentage amongst the C and D schools. And Haldane's a very small school. I mean, so they deserve a lot of credit. Last year was their best win total since 2018 when they had 7 wins. But let's talk about the kids returning. Offensively, Mars, 7 of 11 starters are coming back. They are returning their quarterback and Van Tassel. Offensive line-wise, 3 out of 5 offensive linemen coming back. But they did lose some talented skill player guys out on the outside. This offense was number 5 out of 10 in points scored, averaging 23.7 during the regular season. When I spoke to Coach, a big emphasis was improving the run game. I mean, they really like what they did in the passing game. They were able to hit some big plays with some skill guys, but there's some new faces out there, so they want to try to duplicate that, but improving the run game was a priority. Defensively, 5 out of 11 starters. Again, they lost a bunch of guys in the secondary, very talented guys. This defensive unit, Mars, was strong last year. They were number 2 out of the C&D schools in points allowed at 14, and they gave up less than 16 points in 5 regular season games, right? So, they were a strong unit. And when I asked the coach about things that they can improve on or duplicate, again, they got to search for those young guys to step up in the secondary. That's where they lost the majority of their talent in that secondary. And again, biggest question mark, Coach mentioned it for me. I'm looking at that running game. I'm looking at that secondary. How do they bolster that up and solve it before the start of the season? A couple players to watch for this group. I think their best player is their running back, outside linebacker / defensive end, Evan Gianchinta, the junior, 6'2", 190 pounds. He was a real force off the edge, had multiple sacks, caused a lot of disruption. And on the offensive side of the ball, he was a pretty big weapon coming out of the backfield, catching the ball out of the backfield. And also, he's a pretty decent-sized kid. He can run downhill. Now he's really going to have to anchor both sides of the ball. He's going to have to be the man. Now, can he do that? He's still a young guy as a junior, but their quarterback returns also had a very strong year. Ryan Van Tassel, 6 foot. He's having a better understanding of the game. Coach talked about his situational awareness, which always helps when a quarterback can be more commanding of that. So that's really important. Another guy, their linebacker, offensive guard, Jake Mason, 5'10", 205 pounds, one of their leading tacklers. Guy who has a nose for the football. He's going to have to be really important at that linebacker spot. And a couple skill guys who need to step up, right? Wide receiver, defensive back, Tommy Tucker, 5'10" guy. He's one of the guys to look at. Wide receiver and cornerback, Brody Corliss, the sophomore. He's a skill guy. And Jake Thomas, another young guy, sophomore, another skill guy that, they're looking at that they like the work that they put in so far. Mars, what are your thoughts on Haldane?
I think Haldane is going to be a very interesting team because they have a lot of returning guys and they have a lot of talent. But like you said, for every program, it's going to be difficult to replace the top level talent that had graduated and moved on. So it's really going to be up to the young guys to step it up and make some big plays. And you already mentioned, I think, in my opinion, it's going to have to come from the quarterback. Obviously, Van Tassel is going to have to be, Ryan Van Tassel is going to have to be a very, well-performing quarterback. And I think he has the ability to do so because he's becoming more involved in the system, understands the system, and I think that's going to help him in the long run because he's returning, he knows what's expected of him, and he's only just getting older and more experienced. So I think that him leading the charge, as well as the offensive line, you have around 3 of the 5 coming back, is going to give at least a more of an offensive push for this team, and I think they can be more consistent.
Yeah, and I think they will be because I'm not sure if the defense will be as stout as last year, so we'll see. Let's go to the other league, and I'm calling this League B because I don't know the name exactly, but let's start with Dobbs Ferry, and they're coached by Coach Joe Cox. Last year, Mars 11-1. They won versus Valhalla in the Section C title game. They lost in the state semis for Schuylerville. I hope I said that right, but Dobbs Ferry is, when you think of Class C, prominent top programs, the first one you usually think of is Dobbs Ferry. In the last 5 years, Mars 36-13. That's a 73 win percentage. They are number 1 in wins, and they are number 1 in win percentage amongst the C&D schools. Last year was their most wins in a season since 2011. So really strong year. Now, unfortunately, they lose a lot of talent. Offensively, 3 of 11 starters are coming back. They need to replace their quarterback. 2 out of the 5, though, offensive linemen come back, which is really important. And they bring back their bell cow of a fullback in Dan, and we'll talk about him. But they lose guys like Sanzo, Regalado on the offensive line. This offense was number 2 out of 10 schools in points scored. And when I talked to Coach, He's looking to get a little better each day. I mean, he is very excited about the potential of this unit, but it's got to be focusing in on the little things and getting better day by day. Defensively, 3 out of 11 starters are coming back. You lose Marsland, who was really an impactful defensive player. This was the number one defense, Mars, out of the C&D schools last year, averaging only 10.4 points a game. Coach talked about things that he wants to see from his defense. They got to be physical. They got to play fast. And they don't, this is a really important thing not talked about enough. Usually the top defenses are teams that tackle very well. And so that's a big emphasis on him, is not to miss tackles. Usually the best defenses are probably the best tackling teams. The biggest question mark, again, they graduated a great group of seniors. And they're going to look to see, hey, these young guys stepping up, these new faces stepping up, can they come together and continue to work hard? And their goal is to win a section title. I mean, I think that is the Dobbs Ferry standard at this point, is every year they want to compete for one. And I still think, even though graduating a boatload of players, I still think that they will compete for one. And some of the players to keep an eye on, obviously, I think one of their top players in the section is their fullback and linebacker, Brian Dan. 5'10", 220 pounds. I think he has more nimble feet than people give him credit for. He's never going to be a speedster, but he's a guy who can get out in space and block, and he can catch a little bit out of the backfield too. But Mars, 1,300 yards and 31 touchdowns. 31 touchdowns last year. Was an absolute bell cow for that team, and they're going to need him to be that again. Another guy to keep in mind, a pretty good compliment, running back and defensive back, Brandon Holman. Smooth running back, a real weapon out of the backfield in play action pass, and I think he could do that again. A couple linemen to look at. Offensive guard and linebacker Owen Fishker, 5'10", 180 pounds. He's also going to have to help anchor that defense. He's number 51. And offensive guard and nose guard Jacob Loran, 5'11", 225 pounds. Again, not towering figures, right? But Dobbs Ferry usually has not giant guys, but they have some tough guys who will fight with you in the trenches. And they're going to have to do that. But the last guy, their quarterback. Obviously, in this offense, when you run, option stuff, you run wing T stuff, you need a quarterback who can make quick decisions, right? And play action pass is going to be huge. Kevin Hartnett, the sophomore, 5'11", he's got a big mantle to take up. So we're going to see how the young man does with that. Mars, what are your thoughts on Dobbs Ferry?
Yeah, I feel like the Dobbs Ferry standard is something that is really impressive. I mean, Dobbs Ferry has been one of the most dominant teams in the C&D league or class, and I feel like they kind of they pride themselves on being, the ground and pound team, and clearly you can see that with Brian Dan. I mean, he's got to have passed some sort of school record with 31 touchdowns, 1,300 yards. I mean, I have to go look at the record books over there, because he
crazy.
Was dominant. Yeah,
That's
he was
crazy.
straight up dominant, and I agree. I mean, you look at Brian Dan, his ability to do not only just run downhill, but he's very, I would not going to say completely shifty, but he's very agile for a bigger guy, and he can catch the ball in the backfield. We saw that at the, at the Fam Sports Showcase, where he was getting catches out of the backfield, and he was competing with top-level linebackers in the area. And I think that is something that he definitely has a skill set that is very unique. He does not seem like he's a, I guess you would call a big running back. He has a lot of agility, a lot of, ability, right? And I think that you could say that with a lot of guys from Dobbs Ferry, because they do have kind of a stacked house of skill guys that can make big plays. But the question is going to be, can these young guys make, kind of fill in the pieces, right? Because they did lose a lot of people. So the question I have is just, can those guys step up and kind of fill in the roles that those other guys who were, obviously really, really good, right? And the offensive line obviously needs to be stout. They need to be, the top. They need to be top notch. They need to meet the Dobbs Ferry standard of offensive line, because they're a ground and pound team. You need to have a stable offensive line to be in order to do that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens this coming season.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to the next program, Woodlands, coached by Kurt Bascom in his first season. So trying to change the course of Woodlands football. Last year they were 0-9, and it's been a bit of a struggle again the last 5 years. 13-25. They are returning some starters though on the offensive side of the ball. I did speak to coach. 5 or 6 of the 11 starters are coming back. They are returning their quarterback, but on the offensive line, I think 1 or 2 are coming back. And offense was a real struggle last year. It was a tough year. They were number 10 out of 10 in points scored. When I spoke to coach about the offensive identity, it's about being efficient. They need to do a better job of blocking, staying on blocks. They want to spread use some spread, which will be an element, but it will not be their entire identity. So expect to see different looks from Woodlands this season. And defensively, they had about 4 or 5 starters coming back out of the 11. Again, they were number 10 out of 10 points allowed as well. And, coach, when I spoke to him, he told me he is a defensive guy. He does not want to have a predictable defense, a very vanilla defense. He wants to dictate to the offense. And the focus is obviously preventing big pass plays, which will help, force teams to drive down the field methodically instead of those big chunk ones. When I asked him about the big question mark for his unit, he talked about the buy-in, right? He buying into the team-first mentality. Again, you're going up against some of these bigger programs now that are joining this class. And this is a real reality as well. Woodlands, has been battling preventing other big Catholic schools from trying to take their players. And so, you have to change that culture to try to prevent that, to fend off, some of these arms race Catholic schools from trying to take your top talent. And that's a harsh reality that public schools face, and Woodlands is a good example of that. The goal, he wants to instill a long-term culture, which I always love to hear, and obviously winning some games will help that. But a couple players to keep in mind for Woodlands, and they do have some guys that are interesting to me, and their quarterback, Thomas Gabriel, the senior, Mars. We saw him at the showcase as well. He is tough. Coach talks about he is unflappable. And I thought he improved his technique from what I saw on tape to what I saw during the summer. He's going to be a vital part of this team and this offense. Another guy I saw, wide receiver and cornerback, Justin Gabriel. He's a weapon at the wide receiver spot. Going to have to be a strong two-way player for them. David Gonzalez, running back and safety. Not a very big guy at 5'7", but another kid who's going to have to kind of carry that load running the ball and at defensive back spot. And let's talk about a couple linemen. Johnny Hector, not tall, right? 5'9", 260 pounds. He was hurt last year. He's back, right? Bulky kid on that O-line, D-line. Another offensive lineman, defensive end, Jamison Stevens, big kid, very coachable. Coach talked about. He also says he's pretty savvy, young guy, sophomore. And then offensive lineman, defensive lineman, Trevor Michael. He's a natural leader. He's smart. Coach says, he can move him around. Another guy that coach brought up, Anthony Atkins, wide receiver and linebacker, senior. He has a real fire, hunger to him. I always like hearing about that from different players. That fight and desire is always something that attracts me. Aaron Thomas is another one at the running back linebacker spot. 5'6" kid, right? It's not a very big guy, but he is a wrecking ball, thick-bodied kid, strong kid, downhill type player. And finally, wide receiver and quarterback, Jaden Roberts, the junior. He says he's a very intelligent football player, smart kid, instinctive. And so, you know what? Woodlands is trying to change their culture. They have some guys that have an opportunity to do that.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at Woodlands, I think the biggest thing I'm going to look for them is their offensive line needs to step it up big time. I mean, you're going to have to look guys like Hector, Stevens, and Michael to really push this team going forward. And I do agree with you. I think that when you're looking at Woodlands, they do need to establish a long-term culture, just like that, just like how the head coach has mentioned. Because at the end of the day, I feel like when you do that, it doesn't just stop players from leaving to go to other schools, but it brings more kids out in the building that haven't just played themselves, right? Get some wins, and I think it's going to revolve around the offensive line. And I do think that it's a smart move to kind of use the defense as being kind of the most priority, in my opinion, because of the fact that defense obviously is going to keep teams in games, right? And I think that would be kind of the smart move for Woodlands. And I think they have, if their offensive line can step up, then I could see them kind of being, successful in winning some games. But it's going to really depend on the scheme as well as whether or not the old line steps it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to the next program, Rye-Neck Mars. Coached by Coach Bika. Last year they were 2-6, but this is a year after they were 0-5 the previous year. So I think it was a step in the right direction for them. Last 5 years has kind of been up and down, 15-19, so under 500. I didn't get to speak to Coach about starters returning, but they are returning their quarterback. They lose guys like Murph and Pulcino, which are tough. Again, this was an offense that was 9 out of 10 in points scored, so it was a bit of a struggle defensively. Again, also 9 out of 10 in points allowed. When I look at this team, offensive line, to me, the experience on that offensive line, size on both fronts, offensive line and defensive line. But a couple players to watch for this group. And again, this is based on my research and their quarterback, Hunter Merkel, the junior, 5'10", 175 pounds, well-built kid. he's obviously going to have to lead the way on the offensive side of the ball. And another guy, offensive lineman and defensive end, Santiago Barajas, the senior, 5'8", 202 pounds. Again, not a very tall guy, but decent size to him. Again, can they, I'm bringing this up because I'm looking at this offensive line, and who's going to step up for this group is going to be important. Another guy, Russell Foster, running back and linebacker. He's a senior. Ethan Lithgow, a wide receiver, running back, and defensive back. Another guy, Brandon Kingwood, the senior, tall, long, skinny athlete, but again, has some nice length to him. He's a wide receiver and defensive back. And offensive lineman, Anthony Santiago, the junior. Again, these are just, guesstimates looking at this team. And we're going to see when the season starts who steps up for this unit. Mars, what's your thoughts on Rye-Neck?
Yeah, when I look at Rye-Neck, it's going to be it's tough because there's just not a lot of information that we can go off of going forward with them. But I think the biggest thing I look at is obviously establishing a clear-cut, cohesive plan, especially when it comes to competing against these bigger O-line and more power running schemes. I think that it's going to be based on how big their offensive line is and the size they are that can compete against some of these larger squads. I think winning the trenches is going to give them a lot more leeway in what they can accomplish, especially on the offensive side. Defensively, it's going to do the same thing, right? I think the biggest thing that they need to do is essentially look at what they can do best. And if, let's just say, size is not on their forte, then they definitely need to send a lot of stunts, a lot of things, a heavy amount of bodies to cause some mayhem. And I think the offensive line, defensive line, the fronts are going to be the biggest question that I have, because I just think as an offensive line guy myself, that usually dictates how games go, right? Whoever can win the fronts are going to be either in the positive or in the negative, depending on both offense and defense. So it's going to be a big question for Rye-Neck whether they can compete with a lot of the size that is also in the C&D classes, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, let's go to the next program, Brook, coached by Coach Darren Perillo. Last year, Mars 3-6, which was their highest win total since 2018. And it was more wins last year than the last 2 years combined, the previous 2 years combined. Now, last 5 years, 16-25, but they are returning some talent. Offensively, 8 of 11 starters return. They are returning their quarterback. On the offensive line, 2 out of the 5, so not too bad, but you lose a guy like Shaw. They have a lot of skills coming back, but those are some tough guys to replace. When I spoke to Coach, the big word was consistency on the offensive side of the ball. They had some good drives that they were able to cap off, followed by a lot of 3-and-outs. So again, about that consistency is really important. This offense was number 7 out of 10 in points scored. Defensively, 5 out of 11 starters returned. Coach talked about finishing games is going to be huge. At times, Brook had the lead, and they've blown too many leads last season, which cost them games. They need to finish games better. And this is another group. I know we keep mentioning this, Mars. 2 out of 5 offensive linemen coming back, which is important, but how do they fill the rest of that offensive line and defensive line? Replace a guy like Shore, he was very disruptive. How do they do that is my biggest question. And the goal, again, the goal that Coach talked about, continue to improve the program, take positive steps in this program, in this game, keep kids energetic about this football program. And I got to say this, I'm going to make bold predictions later on, but Brook, to me, it feels like a little bit of an X factor, especially in this league. A couple players to watch. Wide receiver JP D'Inverno. I think he's one of the better wide receivers in the class. 6 foot, 188 pounds. Really good contested catch guy. That's a guy kind of you throw him jump balls and you say, go get it for you. And he, more times than not, comes down with it. He's got good body control, solid feet. And I think he was becoming a better route runner from what I saw last year. Another guy, cornerback and running back, Lucas Montesano. He was a physical guy, 5'8", 165 pounds. I saw him on tape. He was a physical defensive back. Going to have to be a strong two-way player for them. How about their quarterback, right? Jake Minnick. I mentioned he's coming back, 5'10", 175 pounds. He's a guy who did a little bit for you with his legs. He did stuff with his arm. Can he put it together? Can he take that next step up? And if he could, I think it would be a pretty good dynamic, him going to JP. And this is my player to watch, running back and linebacker Rob Carey. The junior, 5'10", 160 pounds, slasher of a running back. I saw some improvement on his footwork this summer. He was at the showcase, and this is a guy who's not afraid of contact. He will run right after. Now, definitely has to work on running with better center of gravity, better balance and a little bit lower. But I'm excited to see this young man. I think he can have a big year, especially, again, if that offensive line can come together. Mars, what are your thoughts on Brook?
Yeah, when you look at Brook, I mean, they do have some weapons, man. And I think that they can make some splashes here, especially with guys like Dean Verno and obviously in Rob Carey. I think that we got to see Rob Carey up close, especially with the showcases. And I think that he has a lot of ability, right? And I think he is the guy, and you already mentioned he was kind of the X factor or the guy to watch. And I'm expecting big things from him. I think he has that X factor ability that he can dictate how games go based on his performance. But the big question, as always, is offensive line. I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to have to replace a lot of key people that had left. And the offensive line is going to make the decision, essentially, on how much of the run game is going to expand, or even about, up front, like just in pass protection. So I want to see how the offensive line does. And hopefully you get to see a lot more, especially from this team and growth of offense, because they do have a lot of weapons. So I want to see what they do here.
Yeah, let's go to the next program, Irvington, and coached by Coach Jeff Michael. Last year they were 4-5. They were in the Hudson Valley Football League last year, so they're jumping back into Section 1, which is good to see. Them trying to make this move back, and they're also returning some guys as well. You can see in the C&D class, Mars, there's a lot of kids coming back that were on the team last year. You're seeing that more and more. But offensively, 6 out of 11 starters coming back for them. They do have to replace their quarterback. On the offensive line, 3 out of the 5 coming back, which is always nice to have. But they lost guys like Flanagan and Piccola. This was the number 3 team out of 6 schools in the Hudson Valley Football League in points scored. When I spoke to Coach about the offense, too many 3-and-outs was down to the big thing, being more efficient, capitalizing with their speed and depth. They believe that they're going to have some speed and depth on that offensive side of the ball, and they want to utilize it. On the defensive side, 7 out of 11 starters coming. Coach talked about getting this unit to be more aggressive, generating more negative plays, getting them into 3rd and long is going to be big. And it's good that they had those 7 kids come back. Last year's group, they were number 5 out of 6 schools in points allowed, so getting that experience I think will help them. Biggest question mark, Coach talked about the experience at quarterback. There's a quarterback battle that's been happening all summer and in camp. I'm excited to see who comes out on top of that. Obviously, we're getting to the end of it, but the goals is growth. I mean, Coach talked about they have a nice sized roster, which is always good, that they're getting numbers, which is great, and they want to develop these kids. Some players to watch for this group. Let's look at special teams, Mars. Punter and kicker Morgan Balkan. I've talked about him a few times already over the last 2 years. I think he's one of the best kickers in this class. I think he continues to develop. He's getting stronger, and he's someone who could be a weapon in special teams. Another guy, wide receiver, defensive back, Finn Cleary, the senior. Good-sized kid, 6'3", not the bulkiest guy, but solid frame, and he could be a big target on this offensive side of the ball. This is my player to watch. Running back and defensive back, Marcus Cannon, the junior. Coach has raved about this young man. This kid is tough. He's not, he's not the shiftiest guy, but boy, he's not afraid. He's a bit of a slasher, and I do think he has an opportunity to be an impact player on both sides of the ball, especially running the ball. I know, again, especially with 3 of the 5 offensive linemen coming back, he could be a factor. One of those linemen is the offensive lineman, D lineman, Devont Webster. I thought he was a disruptive defensive lineman, but he's going to have to anchor both fronts. And finally, to wrap it all off, running back and linebacker Drew Cortese, the junior. Coach has talked about him as well. Mars, what do you want to talk about in Irvington?
Yeah, Irvington kind of sets the similar trend that I've noticed with a lot of teams in this class was a lot of returning guys, right? And I think that when you look at them, generally when you see 6 of 11 on the offense, 7 of 11 on defense, and even 3 of the 5 on the offensive line, you're expecting some big things to occur. But here's the funny thing is that a lot of teams in this class have the same kind of stats here. So the question I have for Irvington is going to be, how efficient is this offense going to be with guys who have to fill in missing roles on the offensive line? But you already mentioned before the quarterback position. I mean, obviously quarterback battles are going to be they always happen in seasons. So it's going to be interesting to see who wins this battle and how efficient are they at the position, because I think that's going to kind of show what how efficient they will be as the season progresses, because it's going to be obviously can be 2 different guys. So I mean, it's just obvious. They're going to kind of show. Yeah, that's a big question. Like, you don't know what's going to happen until you see which quarterback wins and how do they perform in game time scenarios. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, and would I love to know who won the quarterback battle? Of course, but I don't expect coaches to tell me right off the bat. Let's go to the final team, and this is the final D school team in this league, and that is Tuckahoe. And Coach John DiArco last year, Mars 8-2. They won versus Haldane in the section title game. They lost to Greenwich in the state quarters. And this has been one of the more dominant programs over the last 5 years. Mars 31-13, 70% win percentage. They are number 2 in total wins and number 2 in win percentage among the C&D schools behind Dobbs Ferry. They're also returning some talent as well. It's kind of been the theme of the night. Offensively, 6 of 11 starters are coming back. They are returning their quarterback in Annunziata. On the offensive line is kind of where they lost the most of it, though. 2 out of 5 coming back, so still getting some experience, but one big loss is Myers, and Myers was a fantastic back for them for a long period of time, it feels like. But guys like Santucci, Reichelt, Giavetta, most of the skill guys are back, but again, losing some guys up front and losing Myers is tough because this was the number 1 offense Mars had the C&D schools in points scored. They were averaging 41.4 points a game. They had 5 games over 30 points. And when I talked to Coach raved about the 2 quarterbacks that they have. They have 2 strong QBs, but they have to be able to run the ball, especially late in the season. That is a huge emphasis for him. How do you replace Myers? It's going to be an important one. Defensively, Mars, 7 of 11 starters coming back. This was the number 3 out of 10 schools in points allowed. Coach really emphasized about gang tackling and emphasizing on stopping the run more consistently. They were a pretty good unit, but there were some cracks in the armor that Coach has talked about. But they're bringing in some experience that will help back. Biggest question mark, Coach talked about it, replacing Myers. They had a veteran offensive line. They have 3 guys they have to replace. Coach believes the skill position is strong. Can they fill in the other positions up front is the question. Now, a couple guys to talk about. Obviously, got to start with their quarterback, Michael Nunziata. He could beat you with his arm, with his leg, athletic guy. His arm is pretty darn strong when he has his feet set. The question is health, right? Can he stay durable? Can he be durable? Because when he is playing, he is a really strong football player for them. But Coach raves about his leadership. They like his leadership a lot. Another guy I think is a fantastic football player that not a lot of people talk about. Wide receiver and defensive end, John Benke, the senior, 6'3", 200 pounds. I think he is a well-rounded tight end that he can line up in line and run routes. He can line up out wide and play one-on-one with these DBs using his big body, but he can also block. And on the defensive side of the ball, I thought he was pretty solid at the end, too. He's a strong two-way player for them. Another guy, running back and linebacker, Jason Smith, captain of the team. He's got a low center of gravity, bulky, good, decent-sized kid, 5'9", not very tall, but some good thickness to him. And he's kind of going to be that downhill runner to try to, alleviate some of that Myers being missed. And I think, you know what? He was kind of impressive. I know he didn't run too much because Myers took the bulk of the load, but you know what? I think he can do a decent job. A couple of good skill guys, wide receiver Jake Matarazzo, the senior. Not a very tall guy, about 5'5", 5'6", but boy, is he shifty. Coach talks about he is very difficult to cover in space. And how about I mentioned John Benke before? How about Connor Benke, the junior, another wide receiver in corner, 5'9" kid, skinny kid, but you know what? I saw him make some big plays throughout the season. Again, didn't get a high volume, but you know what? He was a reliable target as well. And to wrap it all up, finally, safety and quarterback, Jax Calachicho, the junior, he came in from Annunziata when he got hurt. He's going to be a starter at safety, but he also gets some quarterback reps that Coach mentioned. He got him last year. He might get some more meaningful ones this year as well, Mars. What are your thoughts on Tuckahoe?
Now, when it comes to Tuckahoe, the big question that needs to be answered is how do you replace Myers in this offensive line? Not everyone's going to be gone, but I mean, when you're looking at it, the 4 missing starters or 4 or 5 guys you're missing, at least you're missing out on 4 of them being 3 offensive line and Myers, right? You're missing out on those guys who definitely filled in the role that really pushed this offense going forward. So the question is, how do you replace that dynamic run just scoring, right? The constant scoring that Tuckahoe had from last year and the entire time as Myers was there, because he was a straight up force. So I want to see how they do replace him, and essentially how do they replace those missing pieces on the offensive line. They clearly have the ability to do that because they have a lot of skill players here and they have a lot of just good players. But I want to see how it's done, because for years sometimes it can feel like it's a luxury when you have a top level talent like Myers in your backfield. So you got to see how they kind of bounce back from that. So I want to see how that happens, and I want to see how powerful this team could be without Myers on the sideline.
All right, that was the C&D schools, Mars. We're going to move down to the Hudson Valley Football League before we do our bowl predictions. And again, the Hudson Valley Football League is broken up into two different divisions. It is the Mountain and the River division. And we're going to start with the Mountain. And the first program we're going to talk about is Spring Valley, coached by Coach Delva, who's been there a very long time, and I'm happy to see him back coaching Spring Valley. Last year they were 2-7. They did not make the playoffs. They were in AA, and they're moving down to the Hudson Valley Football League this season. The last 5 years have been a bit up and down. They're 19-23, but they were very young. They're returning a bunch of their guys. Offensively, 7 of 11 starters are coming back. They're returning their quarterback. And on the offensive line, 3 out of their 5 offensive linemen are returning. And when I spoke to Coach, the big emphasis was improving in the run game, and specifically that offensive line play. And the offensive line was young. They think the experience will help, but they are returning a quarterback, a running back. 2 out of the 4 receivers are coming back. They'll have some skill guys, so really up front is going to help dictate these. Defensively, 7-11 starters coming back. We know the style of defense they like to play. They like to blitz. They like to stun. They like to bring bodies. The coach talked about being tougher against teams that run right at you. They have to be able to anchor down, which they struggled with last year. The biggest question mark Coach talked about is depth. I mean, trying to get young players to step up. You know, you return all these guys, but a lot of these guys were really young, right? So they're still kind of young. It's not like, you know, they're all just seniors coming back, right? So, you know, that's going to be an important thing. Depth is going to get young guys. Can they get behind those other guys? The goal, Coach said it. He wants to make a statement this year. He wants to get their numbers up, and they want to win some darn games. So let's see if they can do that, right? A couple players to watch. Their wide receiver, cornerback, and a special teamer is punter. Pretty darn good one, too. Carl Augusti, the junior, 5'11", 146 pounds. He's quick. He's fast. He's a track guy. He's gotten in the weight room. He's gotten stronger. Coach raved about how he's really worked hard this summer, and this is someone definitely to watch, the junior. Wilner Annis, he's worked hard as well. Coach has talked about his progress. Noah Chambers, running back, defensive back, and linebacker, 5'7", 165 pounds, versatile player. You can move him around. He has real toughness to him, not being very tall, but he's a scrappy football player. Their quarterback is someone to watch as well, Jaden Scott, 5'11". Coach talked about having a better understanding of the offense, better understanding of situational football. And I thought, you know what? On his tape, he was raw, but he made some nice throws to him as well. Again, it was a tough year, so you look for positives, and he was one of those positives to me, if he can work on his technique. And finally, wide receiver and defense back Dom Vargas, another not very tall guy, 5'6", but he is speedy and a strong special teams player. Mars, what are your thoughts on Spring Valley?
Yeah, I mean, Spring Valley was extremely young last year, so it was kind of a tough season because of that entire reason itself, because usually what happens is those young guys don't have the experience to really carry a team. But what's really important to see this upcoming season is whether or not those young guys have learned and gained the experience to kind of push this team going forward. Because if they do, then I think they're expected to have a good season. I mean, I think obviously Coach mentions the kind of the question is going to be about depth, right? And every team kind of is wondering about how many good players could they fill in just in case someone goes down. Health is always a concern, but I'm expecting this team to have a better season than last year, due to the fact that their experience is going to be a lot better across the board. So Spring Valley is a very interesting team. I want to see how they perform, especially with this kind of returning wide cast, 7-11 on both offense and defense. So I think they have the ability to do so. Just need to see them capitalize on it.
Yeah, let's go to the next program, Porchester, coached by Chris Halstead. Last year they were 1-8. They were also in AA. They are moving to the Hudson Valley Football League this season. Last 5 years, they're 16-25. Offensively, they're returning 4 of 11 starters. They have to replace their quarterback due to an unexpected change, which we will not get into. But they have to replace their quarterback. On the offensive line, 2 out of 5 starters are coming back. They're making a change from one of their top running backs, or moving to the quarterback spot, which we'll talk about when we go over the players. When I spoke to Coach, he also emphasized focusing on the details of the little things. They want to control the ball, and the big thing is win the point of attack, right? And so when you're running kind of option stuff, you're going to need linemen who can move and can move bodies, and they have to win the point of attack, and that was a big emphasis he talked about defensively. 6 out of 11 starters coming up. They are young up front. He talked about it offensively winning up front, but can they do it defensively as well? Can they win the point of attack? Coach talked about stop giving up the big play. Too often they gave up huge plays, big chunk plays that are absolute killers for a defense, especially momentum-wise. And when I asked for the biggest question mark, Coach brought up the offensive line. They need to find 3 starters. Some of them are going to be newcomers. Some of them could be sophomores. So it could be a very young front for this team. And his goal is really take it 1 week at a time. They want a winning record. They have 38 kids on the varsity, and they want to keep those 38 kids by the end of the season. So that's kind of the goal set. A couple players to watch, Mars. I think one of the best players in the Hudson Valley Football League is their quarterback and strong safety, Colin Taylor. Again, he moved from running back to quarterback. He's a very, very good athlete. I thought he's one of the top DBs. And he's going to have to be a strong two-way player for them. Again, there's not a lot of bodies, right? Especially when you get into the Hudson Valley Football League, you need kids to play both ways. And I think he could be one of the best players in this league. So he's going to be a huge one for them. Halfback and safety, George Velasquez, 6 foot, 170 pounds, big kid, strong, good size to him. He's a senior as well. Another guy could be running the ball, also playing at the back end. And a couple linemen. How about offensive lineman and linebacker, Sean Barber, the senior, 5'11", 215. And then another Barber, Jaden Barber, the junior, also an offensive lineman linebacker. So you can get the Barbers being on the line of scrimmage and playing at the linebacker spot, which is always an interesting dynamic. Mars, what's your thoughts on Porchester?
Yeah, I mean, Porchester's biggest concern with me is that they need to fill in a lot of spots, right? I think that's going to be something that will kind of show whether or not they, how successful they will be based on the people who they fill in, the missing areas that were, obviously kids that had moved on, and they had graduated and everything. So I want to see how they, who they pick in these spots, especially in the offensive line, and how well they do, because that will kind of show whether they'll be successful or not in this upcoming season. So we'll find out.
Yep. Let's go to the next program. Horace Greely, Mars, coached by Joe Kearns. Last year they had a fantastic season, 7-1. They won in the Hudson Valley Football League Championship against Poughkeepsie. Last year was their most wins in a season since 2010. So really fantastic turnaround for Horace Greeley. The last 5 years, they're 16-25. They lost a lot of talent. So they're going to see if they can rebound offensively. 3 out of 11 starters are coming back. They lose their quarterback in Wool, who was fantastic for them, but this is also another big one. 1 out of 5 offensive linemen coming back. So we're going to see a lot of newcomers. Again, they have to replace guys like Wool, Doheny, Santella. This was the number 1 offense out of the 6 schools in the Hudson Valley Football League last year, averaging 26.6 points a game. When I spoke to Coach about the offense, he raved about how the football IQ in their program is going up, and it gives them, hey, running the same system. Now we can continue to run it more efficiently because the kids are seeing it more defensively. 5 out of 11 starters are coming back. They do lose their defensive lineman, Koku, who was really strong for them. They were number 3 out of 6 schools in points allowed. Coach talked about that. They have a new defensive coordinator, so it will be a new look for the team, but they want to hold the same standards that they had last season. So, again, improving their tackling was one of the things he also mentioned. Big question mark. Coach pretty much was very blunt. How tough are these? And, a lot of new faces. Can we show that same grit that they did last year? And they're going to have 6 sophomores on the team. And so the goal is they want to try to win the league again. It's not going to be easy. Again, you have different schools, some bigger boys coming in this league. So we're going to see. Now, a couple players to watch. How about their quarterback? I mentioned replacing Wool to me is a huge one. Julian Osh, the sophomore, raw, but coach likes his potential, 5'11" kid. Another guy, wide receiver, cornerback, Jameson Blakesley, the sophomore. I saw him, they had some weapons on that team last year, and he made a couple big-time plays for them in big moments, and I thought he was pretty impactful, even against a team like Poughkeepsie, which was always a big game. And look to see him make a jump. Another kid, wide receiver, outside linebacker, Eric Forster. And I think at outside linebacker is where he makes his biggest impact. 5'10", 175 pounds, strong tackler, and a solid stunter. They were sending him both inside and outside, and he made some plays for them. Finally, to wrap it all, cornerback, wide receiver, Kyle McKenney, the junior, 5'8", 140 pounds, versatile player, and he kind of affects all 3 phases of the game as a returner, out as a wide receiver, whether it's jet sweeps or throwing it to him. And you know what? At a corner spot, he made some plays. He's not afraid. Not a very big guy, but he came up and made some tackles. Also made some plays on the ball. Mars, what are your thoughts on Horace Greeley?
Yeah, when you look at Horace Greeley, it's a very interesting story. I mean, the fact that they are missing a lot of players on the offensive side, and that's usually their main priority when you look at the way their scheme is, especially being a full spread style of offense. And obviously, the biggest concern is the offensive line missing. You're only returning one of the starters from last year. They are a very interesting team. I think they have ability to make a splash again in the Hudson Valley Football League. But it's going to be based on who they're a young squad. You're going to have a lot of young guys like the sophomores being kind of pulled up and essentially kind of filling into key positions. So how those young guys perform is going to be the big question I have. So Horace Greeley is an interesting case. Got to see how they do.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to the next program, and that is Poughkeepsie. Coached by Mark Bianco. I did not get to speak to Coach Bianco. Poughkeepsie is one of two teams that I'm very in the dark about. Don't have a lot of info on them, unfortunately. But last year they had a really strong year, Mars. 5-2. They lost in the Hudson Valley Football League Championship, and it was their best record since 2012. So a really good job by the coaching staff and the players. But again, not exactly sure how many offensive and defensive starters are coming back. Couldn't get a roster on my hand, but they lost some serious talent. I think they're going to be pretty young this year. They lost their stud running back Moore, Whitaker, Patterson on the defensive side, Sharples, who was really strong for them on the defensive side of the ball. I think this is an important year, Mars, for Poughkeepsie. They're going to be young. It's hard for kind of the smaller football programs to kind of rebound when they have a senior-heavy group. But I do think that this is an important one. Unfortunately, I think this Mountain League is pretty tough in the Hudson Valley Football League. So we're going to see how Poughkeepsie rebounds. But if they can get, string a couple back-to-back years with a winning record, I do think it'll show, hey, some serious progress in the football program. But Mars, what are your thoughts on Poughkeepsie?
Yeah, I completely agree that I think the biggest thing that they need to really establish is just consistency, right? Last year they had a good season. I think that they're going to have a young squad this year, but if they can pull together a coherent plan with these young guys really stepping it up and getting some W's, I think that's going to really help the program in the long run. You're going to get more and more people on board, and it's just going to help develop this program, kind of get more people back. So I'm interested to see what's going to happen. The young guys really do need to step up a lot to really carry the load of this team going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to the last team, Mars, in the mountain side, and that's Ramapo. Coached by Kevin Bullock. Last year they were 3-5. I didn't get to speak to Coach Bullock about specific starters coming back, but I do know they have to replace their quarterback in Gaines. I think they're going to have some skill guys and some backs returning. But the question is on the offensive line and quarterback spot. How are they going to attack that? Defensively, they're bringing back some vets on that side as well, especially I think at the linebacker spot, Mars. I think they're going to be pretty solid at that linebacker spot. The question is going to be in that secondary and up front. But some players to watch, and again, this is based on my research. One guy I really enjoyed watching on tape, excited to see him this coming fall. Quarterback, he plays quarterback, running back, wide receiver, defensive back, Rashawn Griffin. He's a junior, He really is a do-it-all type of guy. He has a nice mix of speed and power. He has a real hard, sharp juke move that kind of makes people look foolish. But this is a guy who can bounce around and be a playmaker. Now, is he the guy who's going to move to the quarterback spot? And not exactly sure, but it feels like he could be successful at whatever spot he's put at. He's really a dynamic athlete for this team. Another guy, offensive guard and defensive tackle, Basir Epps, 5'9", not very tall, but 235. Very physical kid. Also has a strong motor. Another kid, running back and linebacker, Devin Dunham, the senior, solid size kid, 6'2", very coachable, versatile defender. He's going to be, versatile player overall. He's going to have to be another two-way guy. And finally, to wrap it all off, linebacker, Warren Bellholm, 6-foot kid, another solid-sized kid. He makes the calls on the defense. He did at least last year. So he's an intelligent football player, and he's going to have to be kind of that commander again this time around, the senior. Mars, what are your thoughts on Ramapo?
Yeah, Ramapo is going to have some returning guys that are definitely going to play a big role in this team going forward. But yeah, there's still going to be a lot of missing pieces that I do want to see filled, right? And based on who you replace them with, that you're going to see whether they Ramapo will be successful or not. So it's going to be a question mark. I just feel like there's too many things that I have to see when that season starts, because it's just, you're not really getting a lot of info, and you just don't know too many of these guys that have to fill in a lot of missing pieces, like it's at the front, the secondary, the defensive side, offensive line. It's just, there's a lot of stuff that's missing, and I want to see how these young guys perform, or just guys in general, how do they perform in order to carry this forward.
Absolutely. Let's go to the next program. Now we reach the Riverside, and let's talk about Tappan Zee, coached by Coach Ralph Iannucci. Last year, 0-9. They were in A. They're dropping down to the Hudson Valley Football League. Last 5 years has been a struggle, 12-30. Offensively, they're returning 3 of 11 starters. They bring back McCarthy at halfback, Ryan Brown, and Justin Riley, but they have to replace their quarterback, and no offensive linemen are returning, so all new faces at the offensive line spots. When I spoke to Coach, he talked about that QB room is very young. The team is very young, and they're just looking to improve on all facets as the season goes along. Now, defensively, they are bringing back a few more starters, a few more experienced, 5 out of 11 starters, a couple linebackers, a defensive lineman, and a safety. Coach talked about the big thing, preventing big plays and winning on third down. Now, the biggest question mark, Coach China talked about, they have about 8 or 9 positions that will be first-time starters on both sides of the ball, so a lot of inexperience, and they're looking to improve each week and compete in each game the best of their ability. Now, players to look out for, Brett McCarthy is one kid that I really liked watching, running back and linebacker, compact player, kind of a weapon out of the backfield, both as a blocker and receiving. And he is a good stunting linebacker. They like sending him on stunts. He does a good job of getting skinny and penetrating through the line of scrimmage and finishing plays. Another kid, running back and linebacker, Ryan Brown, 6 foot, 195-pound, downhill running back, strong kid. I think that mix is going to be pretty good at the running back spot. Offensive lineman and defensive lineman, Luke Herman. He's going to have to anchor that offensive line and defensive line. He's a returning starter on that defensive front, kind of like I mentioned before. Jason Riley, wide receiver and safety. He's another guy. He's going to be a wingback on offense and a starting defensive back, 5'7" kid. And then finally, offensive lineman, defensive end, Tim Ostranger as a senior, another kid who's going to have to be an impact player on both fronts. And Owen O'Hara, another returning starting defender, running back and defensive back. So again, definitely some more impact guys coming back. And defensively, offense is going to be very inexperienced. But what are your thoughts on Tappan Zee, Mars?
Yeah, the question is going to be the experience and who you're getting, right? I think that's going to be the difficult question of whether or not this team will be successful this season, is how do those young guys perform? I think you said it best, Frank, was that the experience part. You got a lot of guys on both sides of the ball who don't have as much experience as some other teams. Can they step up? Can they play well? That's going to be what really drives the team going forward.
Absolutely. Let's go to the next program. Walter Panas, coached by Coach Bill Castro. Last year, 1-8. They were in Class A. They're moving down to the Hudson Valley Football League. 13-29 the last 5 years. Offensively, 5 of 11 starters coming back. They return their quarterback. They're returning 2 out of their 5 offensive linemen. And they lose guys like Lugo and McNeil, which are losses. When I spoke to Coach about the offense, again, you see this word a lot, consistency. Want to be more consistent, want to finish drives, and they need to reduce turnovers. Turnovers were a big issue for them last year. Defensively, 6 out of 11 starters are returning, 3 DBs, 2 linebackers, 1 D lineman. So kind of that back 7 is going to be pretty experienced from last year. Defensive line obviously is going to be the question, but coach is looking for those extra efforts, forcing turnovers, giving the offense more opportunities. The biggest question mark, he said, hey, how resilient are we? Can we put these pieces together? Do not hang on the bad things too long, whether it's losses, bad plays. He felt that they kind of dwelled on it a little too long last year. And they want to get better each day. That was kind of their goal that Coach talked about. Now, players to keep an eye on, I do think they have some talent coming back. First guy I got to talk about, quarterback and safety, Travis Carlucci, Mars, the junior. I think he's one of the best athletes in this area. Very smooth guy. And when he's in open space, there is not many people who can catch him. He is absolutely explosive, has that extra gear. Also a very deadly returner. Another guy, defensive back and wide receiver, Paul Ronga, the senior, 5'9", another fast kid. Going to have to be a playmaker on both sides of the ball. I thought he was pretty good in space, but I thought he was also a strong defensive back for them. How about an offensive lineman and defensive lineman, TJ Saras, 6'4", 280 pounds, Mars, a mountain of a man, but he is raw. And if he can work on that technique, he can be a real anchor, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Another kid linebacker, offensive lineman, Cooper Schmidt, undersized, but he is tough. He is a wrestler. Coach raved about his work as well. Linebacker, tight end, fullback, Randy Weisner, Mars, the junior, transfer from Stepinac, 6'1", 210 pounds. Another guy you put on the defensive side of the ball. And if he's a tight end or fullback, possibly a big blocker for them as well. And then Brandon DeGorio, JV kid, worked really hard, junior. He's a wide receiver. You think he'd be another weapon, Mars? What are your thoughts on Walter Panas?
Yeah, I mean, Walter Panas is going to have some solid amount of guys returning to the ball, returning on both offense and defense. Run 5 out of the 11 on offense, 6 out of 11 on defense. I think I kind of want to see how some of these guys who do return, or even guys stepping in new positions, how they perform. I mean, you're really expecting guys like Travis Carlucci to really be the fire that this offense really needs, right? And you're going to need to see guys step up and make plays, because it's going to help kind of alleviate the pressure that gets put on this defense. You need more plays from the offensive side, giving some more room to work, right? And I think that Walter Panas can do that. They do have some weapons on their side.
Let's go to the next group, Hastings, coached by Coach O'Hare. Last year, 2-6. They were in C last year, moving down to the Hudson Valley Football League. Offensively, Mars, they're returning 8 of 11 starters, including their quarterback and 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen. They do lose Friedman. When I talked to Coach, there was a big emphasis, and we talked about this a few times on Hastings. They want to be less reliant on the impromptu play-action plays and be more efficient in the structure of the play. And I do think that it's an important one. I think a little too often they relied on kind of the Houdini plays by their quarterback. Defensively, 7 out of 11 starters are coming back. Coach says, hey, he wants to create more pressure. Expect to see more blitzes and stunts to help their secondary out a little bit. The biggest question mark, there's a new independent league. You're seeing a lot of these kind of bigger schools coming down. So you're going to see a lot of new systems, some new faces, but they're excited to see it. And the goal is they want to win that independent league. They lost 17 starters last year to injury marks. They're hoping to be a little bit more healthy this year and to compete. And I think, there's a couple guys that I'm about to mention that will help them if they are going to compete. And that starts with their quarterback, Robert Kennedy, Mars, 5'11", 170 pounds. He's an athletic kid. I thought he improved on his accuracy last year. He's a guy who just kind of makes plays happen when things break down, a kind of a b'ig playmaker for them. And I think this kid, one of the best players in this Hudson Valley Football League, Keith Capuano, the junior, Mars, tight end, outside linebacker, 6'4", 195 pounds. He's, again, a tight end who can be in line. He could be out wide. Could be a little bit better as a blocker overall, but a strong player at that tight end spot. An outside linebacker, a guy who can run and make plays and tackle in space. Finally, their center, James Constantine. Full year at the center spot. Can he, be that anchor on that offensive line? He is a junior. What's your thought on Hastings?
Yeah, Hastings has like a lot of returning players coming back. I mean, offensively, 8 out of the 11. I mean, it kind of makes sense because there was just a lot of injuries last year. So the kids who had to step up and play in positions last year are guys who are just going to be coming back this season. So I do want to see these guys who have had a lot of experience step up big time, because you're going to really get majority of the players from last year are going to be playing again. I mean, unless something happens, right? And I think that's the other thing. Health. Can they stay healthy, and can really capitalize on this experience that they all have?
Yeah. All right, the last 2 programs, Marston, one of them we're going to talk is Peekskill. Now, I didn't get to speak to Coach Gardner in his first season. Last year, they were 0-5, and I'm just going to say this on Peekskill because, again, it's hard if you're not, updated on Huddle, if you don't have a roster, you don't get to speak to the coach, it's hard to kind of get the insight that you're hoping, unless, and again, you don't have access to the tape. It's hard to. But, I'm going to say this about Peekskill. I really do hope for, some consistency with the coaching and with the programs, that they can help drive kids to want to come play with Peekskill. And I do wish Coach Gardner very well. I kind of want to see Peekskill succeed. I do think they're going to be a young team. I don't think they're going to have a lot of players on the roster, but I know their athletic director is a big component of putting this league together. Coach Gardner, from what I see online, seems to be doing, the right things and trying to generate some people excited in the Peekskill community about football. And I think that's really important. I think, they're kind of starting at ground zero again, and ground one, or whatever you want to call it, and trying to build this thing up. with a foundation. And so that's where I kind of want to give my brief thoughts on Peekskill. I don't have a lot of information on them, unfortunately. But Mars, do you have any quick thoughts?
No, yeah, I feel like I want to see Peekskill do well, but it's difficult because you're trying to get as many kids out to in to join the program as much as possible, and you can see that with their new turf. Right, these are all things that we're trying to get more people to come watch games and be a part of the program. So I hope the best for Peekskill. I want to see them grow as a program and be successful.
Let's go to the last program, Edgemont, and that's coached by James Pappy. Last year, 4-4. They lost to Poughkeepsie in the semifinals for the Hudson Valley Football League. Edgemont has been pretty strong these last few years, Morris. Last 5 years, 23-13, 64% win percentage. Offensively, 7 of 11 starters are returning. They're returning their quarterback, Gian Leonardo. Offensive line-wise, 3 out of 5. Question for me is, can they handle some of the size of these other teams that have just joined the league? Coach talked about he wants to be more balanced air versus ground game, which is an emphasis. Defensively, 7 of 11 starters are back. Coach talked about finishing plays at the point of attack. They felt that they were there last year, but couldn't finish them. Big question mark Coach brought up. New teams in this league, bigger schools. Again, they don't have a lot of kids on their roster. How are they going to handle the depth if a kid goes down is going to be a big one. And they want to finish this season strong. They felt like they were better than their record was last year, and they kind of want to rebound. A couple players to keep an eye on for this group. Their quarterback, Milan Leonardo, their senior. He's a captain, 6'1", 165 pounds, dual-threat quarterback. He is really important for this program, and durability is obviously going to be a big one for him as well because he is a playmaker. They need him out there. Another guy, wide receiver linebacker, Peter Alinkos, their captain. Fast, solid tackler in space. Going to have to be another strong two-way player for this team, but I really like what he did at the linebacker spot coming off the edge. He had a few sacks last year that were pretty good. Another kid, wide receiver, defensive back, Davis Kim. I really like him. This is another captain, 5'9", really good in the slot, really reliable target, solid route runner, decent body control, strong hands, good player. Nate Parsons, offensive tackle, defensive tackle, 6'2", 275. He's that big body kid on the line. Can he help anchor down that both fronts? Running back and linebacker, Joey Saito, a 5'9", 175 pounds, really tough runner. And if they want to be more balanced, have a more balanced attack, he's going to be a guy who's going to have to carry that load running the ball, because I do think they have some wide receivers, but he's not very big. But you know what? He runs with a pretty good center of gravity, and he runs hard. And finally, Jesse Kaminkas, defensive and offensive tackle, 6'1", 220 pounds, another guy. Can he be on the defensive line, offensive line? Got to be another two-way guy for them. Mars, what are your thoughts on Edgemont?
I mean, I'm really looking forward to seeing Milan Leonardo be, a star. I mean, he's just so explosive and such a good player that I think that Edgemont has the ability to do really well based on these skill players that they have. And obviously, you're seeing a lot of returning guys coming back, 7-11 on both offense and defensive sides. And I just want to see, can this offense be consistent with this offensive line and obviously on the back, Leonardo.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that was all the teams. I know it was like a marathon here, going through all the CD and Hudson Valley Football Leagues. But before we close the show, Mars, we have to do my bold predictions. And what I'm going to do for this, guys, I have looked into my crystal ball. I'm a big, and again, age appropriate, I like to kind of take some gambles and some bets and some parlay bets, but I have seen the light. I have looked into my crystal ball, and I have seen the future for CD and Hudson Valley Football League, and I'm going to make some bold predictions, and I'm going to give Mars the opportunity to buy or sell them. And at the end of the year, we'll see how foolish he is for not agreeing with me on all of them. But let's dive right into it, Mars. My first one is going to be a C prediction. Croton Harmon, the last time they won 3 games in a season, I mentioned this before, was 2018. And the last time they had 4 wins in a season was 2012. That streak ends this year. I have Croton Harmon with 4 or more wins this season. Mars, do you buy or sell?
I'm going to buy. I think that Croton Harmon has a lot of returning players. I mean, they both have 7-11 on offense and 8 of the 11. 7-11 on offense and 8 of the 11 on defense. And I think they have a lot of guys returning, which is going to give them probably their best asset, experience. And I think that they can pull it off for sure.
All right, let's do my second one. It's going to be a parlay, which means there's 2 bets in one. Albertus Magnus will have a top 3 offense in points scored in the regular season among the C&D schools. And Blind Brook will make the playoffs. So I got to hit on both. I've seen the crystal ball, Mars. Do you buy or sell?
I'm gonna sell them. I don't think that's gonna happen. It's a tough thing to have both occur, right? And I think that's why
The parlay
I'm not
bet.
gonna. Yeah, I'm not gonna. I don't think I'm gonna give. I'm gonna sell them for sure.
All right, another C prediction or bet is a playoff prediction. I'm going to give you 3 out of the final 4. Those 3 out of the final 4, there's going to be 3 of them. In C will be Westlake, Dobbs Ferry, and Valhalla. 3 out of the 4 in the semis.
I'm gonna buy that. I'm gonna buy that. I'm gonna buy it. I think they all 3 of those teams have a lot of talent. I think even looking at Westlake being a very young team last year, they all kind of have a lot of depth. I mean, for the most part, Dobbs Ferry is probably the group that has a lot more slots to fill. But even then, I think they have some really powerful. Brian Dan is just a very good player, and I think that they're gonna ride on his back essentially. So I think I'll buy that one.
Let me do a Hudson Valley Football League one. Spring Valley and Walter Panas will be the number 1 seeds in their league. So that's the Mountain River at the end of the regular season. Buy or sell?
I'm gonna go with sell. I'm gonna go with sell. I think I'm not gonna guarantee anything. I just think that's a tough one. I think it's gonna be tough. I'm gonna sell here, and I think I'm right on it.
All right, to wrap it all off, my final Hudson Valley Football League prediction. I have seen it in my crystal ball. Walter Panas will be the Hudson Valley Football League champs at the end of this year.
You're really going bold on this one.
They're bold predictions. They have to be bold.
I might get a lot of hate, but I'm gonna go sell. I don't think they're gonna be the champs for the HVFL. I think I'm not gonna say who I think. You know what? Screw it. I'm gonna say Spring Valley's gonna be the HVFL.
Wow.
That's what I think. That's my bold thing. So that's my bold prediction. Hopefully, I'll probably get a lot of hate on in the comments section, but I think I'm gonna sell. I'm gonna sell that.
All right, we shall see. But again, this was the end of the show, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Football season is right here, and we can't thank you guys enough for the support. Make sure, again, if you guys like the content, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for future content. But that will be it for us. Have a good night, guys.